Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to another installment of Radio Wasteland's The History of in about 10 minutes. Tonight we'll be covering the history of structures on the surface of Mars. Let me warn you, we're going to cover a little of the history of Mars in our night sky before we get to the good freaky stuff. Also, this has a bit more info in it, so we're going to have to move quickly if we expect to be done in about 10 minutes. This has been a topic I've been way into, totally interested in. I spent nights upon nights going to sleep listening to Richard Hoagland being interviewed on Art Bell and George Norrie, and I just love the topic. Richard Hoagland has like some 6-hour video where he goes over image by image. I'm not sure if it's all that interesting, but it's very cathartic, very relaxing. But let's get into it. Probably the oldest reference to Mars we have is from the ancient Sumerians during the Unbad or Uruk period. Unbad? I'm not sure. We're somewhere between 65,000 BCE and 3100 BCE. Of course, you're going to have to forgive me because I might be mispronouncing dead languages. I don't know. The Sumerians believed that Mars was their god of war and plague named Nergal. While the title sounds important, Nergal was considered to be a minor deity of little significance, which I found a little shocking because when I think of dead civilizations, I think of war and plague. After that, in Mesopotamian texts, Mars is referred to as the star of judgment, of the fate of the dead. With the Greeks and Romans associating it as their god of war, it seems Mars has been dealing with a bad reputation for thousands of years. The existence of Mars as a wandering object in the night sky was recorded by ancient Egyptian astronomers and by 1534 BCE, at which time they were also familiar with the retrograde motion of the planet. Okay, on a side note, I had to look up the difference between BCE and BC, and apparently, there isn't one. They both mean the same thing. They both mean before Common Era, but the term was changed from BC, which was often misunderstood, to mean before Christ, to give it a more scientific distinction. I'm not sure why science and religion are still at odds in this day and age, but I'm sure there are some wackos out there that have their suspicions. By the period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian astronomers were making regular records of the positions of the observable planets. The inner and outer planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, were identified by ancient Babylonian astronomers in the 2nd millennium BC. For Mars, they knew the planet made 37 synodic periods, or 42 circuits of the zodiac, every 79 years. Now, I know all that stuff seems pretty science-y, but it just goes to show you that if we turn off TV and YouTube for a little while, we could figure out some pretty impressive stuff. By the 19th century, the resolution of telescopes had reached a level that made it possible for surface features of some of the planets to be identified. A perihelic opposition of Mars occurred on September 5th, 1877. During opposition, Mars and the Sun are on direct opposite sides of the Earth. Perihelia is when Mars is at the point in its orbit where it's closest to the Sun. These two in conjunction make the surface of Mars more visible to telescopes. But these two events rarely overlap, and a perihelic opposition occurs only once every 15 to 17 years. In 1877, the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli used a 22-centimeter telescope in Milan to help produce the first detailed map of Mars. These maps notably contained features he called canali. These canali were supposedly long, straight lines on the surface of Mars, to which he gave names of famous rivers on Earth. His term, which means channels or grooves in Italian, was popularly mistranslated in English as canals. Influenced by the observations, the Orientalist Percival Lowell founded an observatory which had 30 and 45-centimeter telescopes. The wealthy American astronomer then performed his own observations of Mars in 1890 and saw the same type of lines that Schiaparelli saw. But Lowell went one step further than his Italian counterpart. Lowell concluded that if there were canals on Mars, they must have been constructed, which in turn meant there must be intelligent beings on the planet who built them. All right, so he went on to publish several books on Mars and life on the planet, which he, had a great influence on the public. The canali were independently found by others astronomers like Perrotin and Thalin using one of the largest telescopes at that time. Although it seems to me that leap to writing a scientific book about the life on the planet you can barely make out structures on is a big one. However, this world has not really had a shortage of people willing to make that leap. Hell, if you listen to Radio Wasteland, you know that. It's not necessarily odd that the idea of Martian canals were so readily accepted by many. At this time in the late 19th century, astronomical observations were made without photography. Astronomers had to stare for hours through their telescopes, waiting for a moment of still air when the image was clear, and then draw a picture of what they had seen. They saw some lighter and darker albedo features, large areas on the surface of a planet which show a contrast in brightness or darkness with adjacent areas. Many at the time believed that they were seeing oceans and continents. They also believed that Mars had a relatively substantial atmosphere. They knew that the rotation period of Mars was almost the same as Earth's, and they knew that Mars's axial tilt was almost the same as Earth's as well, which meant it had seasons in the astronomical and meteorological sense. They could also see Mars' polar ice caps shrinking and growing with these changing seasons. It was only when they interpreted changes in surface features as being due to seasonal growth of plants that life was hypothesized. By the late 1920s, however, it was known that Mars is very dry and has a very low atmospheric pressure. In 1889, American astronomer Charles A. Young reported that Schiaparelli's canal discovery of 1877 had been confirmed in 1881. And new canals had appeared where there had not been any before, prompting what he called very important and perplexing questions as to their origin. During a favorable opposition of Mars in 1892, W.H. Pickering observed numerous small circular black spots occurring at every intersection or starting point of the canals. Many of these had been seen by Schiaparelli as large dark patches and were termed seas or lakes. But Pickering's observation was in Peru, about 2,400 meters above the sea, and with such atmospheric conditions that were, in his opinion, equal to a doubling of telescopic aperture. And then they were soon detected by other observers as well. As the polar snows melted, the adjacent seas appeared to overflow and spread out as far as the tropics, and were often seen to assume a distinctly green color. At this time, it began to be doubted whether there was any seas at all on Mars. Under the best conditions, these supposed seas were seen to lose all trace of uniformity, their appearance being that of mountainous country broke by ridges, rifts, and canyons seen from a great elevation. These doubts soon became certainties, and it is now universally agreed that Mars possesses no permanent bodies of surface water. Cydonia is a region on Mars that has attracted both scientific and popular interest. The area includes the regions Cydonia Mensae, an area of flat-topped mesa-like features, Cydonia Collis, a region of small hills or knobs, and Cydonia Labyrinthis, a complex of intersecting valleys. As with other albedo features on Mars, the name Cydonia was drawn from classical antiquity, in this case from Cydonia or Kydonia, a historic city-state on the island of Crete. Cydonia contains the face on Mars, located about halfway between the Arandus crater and the Bamberg crater. Cydonia lies in the planet's northern hemisphere in a transitional zone between the heavily cratered regions to the south and the relatively smooth plains of the north. Some planetologists believe that the northern plains may once have been ocean beds and that Cydonia may once have been a coastal zone. Now, this is by no means saying that there is life on Mars or intelligent life on Mars or that Cydonia was real. I don't know, but, civilizations, on a coastal bed, mountains to one side, plains to the other, an ocean, that's kind of a place where one might build their civilization. So Cydonia was first imaged in detail by the Viking 1 and Viking 2 orbiters. 18 images of the Cydonia region were taken by the orbiters. One of the 18 images were too low of a resolution to be valuable. Of the 7 good images, 2 were similar, and that left us with really only 5 good images of the area. In one of the images taken by Viking 1 on July 25, 1976, a Cydonian mesa had the appearance of a humanoid face. When the image was originally acquired, Viking chief scientist Gary Soffen dismissed the face on Mars as a trick of light and shadow. However, a second image also shows the face and was acquired 35 Viking orbits later at a different sun angle. More than 20 years after the Viking 1 images were taken, a succession of spacecraft visited Mars and made new observations of the Cydonia region. These spacecraft have included the NASA Mars Global Surveyor, which is up there from 1997 to 2006, and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter from 2006 and is still going now. and the European Space Agency's Mars Express probe from 2003 that's also still going. By combining data from the high-resolution stereo camera on the Mars Express probe and the Mars Orbiter camera on board NASA's Mars Global Surveyor, it has been possible to create a three-dimensional representation of the face on Mars. And unfortunately, since it was first imaged, the face on Mars has been accepted by scientists as an optical illusion. The Cydonia facial pareidolia inspired individuals and organizations interested in extraterrestrial intelligence and visitations to Earth. And the images were published in the context in 1977. Some commenters, most notably Richard C. Hoagland, one of my faves, believes the face on Mars to be evidence of a long-lost Martian civilization, along with other features they believe are present, such as the apparent pyramids around the outside, which they argue are parts of a ruined city. For the most part, the argument now moves to Richard Charles Hoagland, an American author and proponent of various conspiracy theories about NASA, including lost alien civilizations on the Moon and Mars. In 1976, Hoagland, an avid Star Trek fan, initiated a letter-writing campaign that successfully persuaded President Gerald Ford to name the first space shuttle the Enterprise, replacing the previous slated name for the prototype vehicle, Constitution. Hoagland also authored the book The Monuments of Mars, A City on the Edge of Forever, published in 1987, and co-authored the book Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. Hoagland runs the Enterprise mission website, which he describes as, and I quote, an independent NASA watchdog and research group, the Enterprise mission, attempting to figure out how much of what NASA has found in the solar system over the past 50 years has actually been silently filed out of sight as classified material and therefore totally unknown to the American people. So back to Mars, Hoagland claims that the source of a so-called NASA cover-up with relation to the face on Mars and other related structures is a result of a report commissioned by NASA and authored by the Brookings Institution, the so-called Brookings Report. The 1960 report, entitled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs, is claimed by Hoagland on page 216 of the report to instruct NASA to deliberately withhold from the public any evidence it may find of extraterrestrial activity, specifically on the Moon, Mars, or Venus. Hoagland also claimed the face on Mars is part of a city built on Cydonia Platina, consisting of very large pyramids and mounds arranged in a geometric pattern. Most of Hoagland's evidence comes from poring over NASA images of the Martian surface and pointing out anomalies, some of which can be very intriguing. But, to be fair, while I may be skeptical of it all, I am a huge fan of Hoagland and have subjected myself to hours upon hours of his interviews. Hoagland's theory has gone beyond Mars to include possible structures on other bodies and planets in the solar system, such as the Moon and even Pluto. Okay, so what do you think? Are there ancient structures on Mars? Personally, I've always thought that it was easily possible that a civilization may have risen on Venus. But good luck getting down there to check it out, seeing how the Russians sent several landers there that were only able to send back information for a short period of time due to the heat and extreme pressure of the atmosphere. And the Brookings report seems to say that the world would go to hell in a handbasket if we ever had proof of alien life. But in my opinion, I would find it quite comforting to know that life is abundant and that we're not all alone clinging to a pale blue dot in a universe that doesn't care if we live or die.